What's up, everyone? Welcome back. So, if you've been following along on my Substack, you know the deal, right? We write the article, you guys read it, and then I want to take you one level deeper, right? Not a recap of the article, because you've already read that, but I want to focus in on one particular part of the article, and today's theme, which I think is wildly underrated and fairly misunderstood. But in the article, it came at the end. So I want to start at the end and then we'll work our way back. But when we talk about superpowers for the former athlete, the one thing that we really don't give enough credit to is work capacity. And this is not productivity hacks that you see on the internet. This is less about time management and is definitely not about morning routines of waking up, splashing a bottle of ice water on your face, maybe dousing yourself in Saratoga, the blue bottle. Like, none of that really matters. I'm talking about when we were athletes, that superpower that we built, the ability to do and manage hard things repeatedly, right? Working under pressure and not falling apart in the process. Now, we don't really see that a lot in the corporate world. We actually see the opposite. We see a lot of work capacity that is limited, but people push past that, and that's where they get into burnout. But for us, we want to make sure that we're focusing in on pushing ourselves to that limit without breaking, not necessarily burning out. And the problem I want to tackle here, right, is what happens to that superpower when the game ends, when our athletic career closes. You've done your senior day, you've played your last game, and now maybe you went pro, right? If you go college to professional, but now what if you're going to the other side of the professional realm, the real world, right? So what happens when that game ends? And this is a moment that we all hit as an athlete, whether you hit it in high school, in college, or at the professional level. When you step away from your sport, we all know that the structure disappears. You don't have the early morning practices. You don't have the set study hall times. You don't have dedicated film sessions. The scoreboard disappears. There's no tangible thing that you can look at to see how well you're doing relative to the rest of the world. That scoreboard just isn't there. And most importantly, your coaches disappear and the feedback loop that goes with them. And so you do something, you get feedback, you do it again, you get more feedback, right? That's that loop that I'm talking about. And when you're in the real world, nobody's timing your reps. No one's yelling at you from the sidelines, touch the line or get back on defense. And no one really tells you if you're winning or not. So this ambiguous space can be challenging for a lot of folks in our community. And most people miss this when you make that transition. It's that you don't necessarily lose your edge that you got from being an athlete. You either sharpen it or dull it based on the environment that you go into. And if you go into an environment that doesn't allow you to keep that edge sharp, it's more about finding one that will do that for you, or finding the things that will help you keep that edge. Because what you built as an athlete wasn't just skill, right? It was the ability to push through when you're tired, and that matters a ton when we're talking about big, important projects for the work you're doing, right? It's about your ability to stay focused. I mean, for me, it was being able to step to the free throw line and knock it down when it mattered, and the ability to execute under pressure. Like, how many times, and I'll use basketball as the reference because that was my sport, did you need to run a play to try to get a basket to win the game, right? So your ability to execute under pressure, and a lot of folks don't realize that these are the traits that carry over with us. Maybe you're not putting the ball in the basket anymore, but maybe your ability to push when you're tired, your ability to create focus when it does actually matter, and your ability to execute under pressure, those are things that carry over to anything that you do, not just sports. And it's not something that people just have. It's something that you build up over time and that you actually train. And when you get into the corporate world and most professional environments, that's rare unless you go into that unicorn of a company that is built up of former athletes. The average person doesn't get it. They get it to a certain point, but your ability to do so much more is the rare piece. And when we're talking about work capacity as being our real superpower, let me clearly define it, because it's not just your ability to do hard things, but it's your ability to sustain that high quality output over a long period of time. It's your conditioning. And that shows up especially when the environment is uncomfortable. It's not something that you can do for a day. That's just willpower. And it's not something that you do just when you feel good, because that's motivation, and we know that that's short lived. But it's you stepping up to the challenge and being able to have that output when things are hard, when maybe the work is boring, or maybe there's no clear direction, but you know exactly what to go do. And that's where we as athletes and we as former athletes thrive. Because if you think about it, the sports that we played forced you into a cycle. Now, in strength and conditioning, we call it the GAS system, but basically it's stress, recovery, adaptation. So when we're strength training, you are putting a stress into the body, giving it time to recover, and during that recovery is when your body adapts to it. Now, as an athlete, in this general adaptation syndrome, that's what GAS stands for, is that, in practice, you are stressed. You go back, you get a good night's sleep, you adapt, and when you adapt, those skills become ingrained. And you do this over and over and over again, especially when you get feedback on the stress that you've experienced. And this process builds something that a lot of people never develop. And that's the tolerance for doing hard things without just collapsing into an emotional puddle. One of my coworkers and I would talk about our shared experience of just being able to manage stress better than some of our peers, because we did hard things as athletes, and we both maintained a solid fitness output. And we agreed that the folks who continued to work out, even the regulars, right, who didn't play a sport, but they got into doing something with their body, allowed them to do more and handle more stress in the office. Because here, like, when you're in that environment, in that professional world, that ability to tolerate discomfort shows up in a couple different ways. You're staying calm in chaotic meetings. You got people arguing across the table, trying to get their point across, and it's you being able to kind of keep an even keel without letting your emotions get out of hand. It's delivering when you're on a tight timeline. You've been given a deadline. You've got to get work done. You've got to get it done at a high level quickly. Your ability to buckle down and deliver matters. And I think this is important, especially if you're working with teams, is you can't be the one that spirals when something breaks down. A process, a system, working in fitness clubs, it was, okay, well, if our client management software goes down, what the hell do we do? It's being able to come up with solutions while everyone else is trying to point the finger and place the blame. And in these cases, when you are able to have that high work capacity, pressure doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like a normal Tuesday, and then you go home and go on with the rest of your day. It doesn't wreck your entire week. And so when you move out of that athletic environment and into the real world, as I like to call it, you don't get the coach, you don't get the structure, you get managers. And that's where things can either fall apart quickly or you actually find a good leader. Because when you actually step away from the sport, the coaching is the piece that actually helps you progress. So feedback is constant when you're an athlete. You may not actually get feedback depending on your leader when you get into the real world. You messed up, you hear about it immediately from your coach, you improve, yeah, okay, that gets reinforced. But sometimes when you're not in sport and you're dealing with a manager who's busy doing their own thing, you may not get it. You may hear, you messed up, what the hell, don't do it again. Or you show improvement in something, but you may not get the recognition. And that's where a lot of folks struggle, a lot of former athletes, I should say, struggle. Because the feedback is infrequent, it's vague, and it may not even exist in some situations, as I've mentioned. And so without that loop, your edge starts to dull. Your work capacity starts to drop. Not because you're actually less in shape or, less conditioned to do the work, but it's because you're not being challenged appropriately. And that's what a good coach does for you. And it makes me think about the team that I built in one of my last stops in the corporate world. We were a lean team. It was myself and 4 gals underneath me. And I didn't come out of the gates thinking, you know what, I'm going to take this team of 4 and we are going to be this elite team of operators and we're going to go do all this cool stuff in our clubs. And that wasn't the case. It was more of, I just need to get them to do the jobs that they signed up for and do it at a high level to make my life a little easier. And, I started the role that I was in before I got to this team of 4 with a team of 1. And that person was not an athlete. And I think it rubbed me the wrong way. Just we weren't a match from a work ethic standpoint, nor a cultural standpoint of, I want to work hard, and when I'm not working, I want to recover, and then when I'm ready to work again, I'm going to go and work and bust ass. Where they wanted to do work on their own time, they would get the work done, but it was not because it was for the team, it was for self. And that's where there was a little bit of headbutting. And so as I was expanding my team and bringing on other folks, I knew what didn't work, and it was on me at some point to figure out what did. But, I had been in an environment with my former leader where if you made a mistake, you were punished. And when other people got tight, they got defensive. They were afraid to try things. They didn't want to do anything that they may fail at. And that killed performance. Like I was miserable. So when I moved over and built this team, I flipped that script. Like I wanted to build that entire team on one principle. And that was coaching and feedback, not for punishment, but for improvement, right? So anything that we did, I understand mistakes are going to be made. Like I'm a shooter. The last shot that I missed, I don't remember. So you have to take the coaching and move on. And that was what I wanted to do with my team. So if they did make a mistake, it wasn't, why'd you screw that up? Don't do it again. It was more of, okay, what happened that the mistake was made? Why did that happen? And what do we learn from this? And how do we get better fast? Because I'd rather they fail fast and have the opportunity for learning than to just, mark it down as a demerit and move on, right? Because that wasn't going to help us in the future. And then as we got into that, and then as they felt more comfortable admitting that they had made a mistake and understanding that I was going to coach them and coach them pretty hard, but it wasn't coming from feelings of being threatened. It was coming from a place of love because I wanted them to be successful. Because I knew if they were successful, in turn, I would be. And so it's more about coaching the process in this way, right? And so when we got deep into that, something happened. These guys already worked pretty hard. They went to the next level, not because they had to, but because they actually wanted to. They saw their work improve, they saw their impact grow. And the more that I was able to push them, the more they were able to push themselves even further. And instead of avoiding failure, they wanted to try new things, and they wanted to fail so that they could continue to learn. And so that's what I think a lot of our great coaches in sport do. And that's how we can carry that tradition of coaching for feedback over and coaching for feedback for improvement over, is that we look at the principles, not necessarily the content that we're actually coaching to. And so I bring that up because that was probably my most favorite team. And I wasn't a great leader to begin with, but it took me looking in the mirror to realize that that team didn't get better because I was practicing old methods. They got better because I got better. Early on, when I first became a personal training manager, I was a terrible leader. Now, my team might beg to differ, but comparing myself now to where I was 10, 15 years ago, that I by and far, I am a much better leader today. I was inconsistent. I really hated doing one-on-ones, just because I wasn't. A lot of the trainers that I had on staff were older than me, and so trying to tell someone who's done the job more was not a comfortable position to be in. Right? I caught myself scoreboard watching. We had a big dry erase board. It's probably why I have a dry erase board always behind me now, where I would put up our goals and update the goals at least once a day. And when I was really feeling the pressure, 2 and 3 times a day, because I wanted them to constantly know what the scoreboard was. But I was focused on the scoreboard, not about the process that would get us to those goals, right? So I was always expecting that output without always providing the clear direction that they needed. And when we were close to the end of the month, I defaulted to putting pressure on them without providing them clarity, without providing them that why. And I ended up treating that group of trainers like effort alone was enough. Like, we can muscle through anything, because that was my way of operating at that time. And I think that's a trap that a lot of us former athletes fall into, because at one point effort was enough, and it was enough for a long time. But as you transition into leadership, it's not necessarily about how hard you go. It's about how well you can bring the group around you up, and improve their performance because of the work that you do with them. Not the work you do for them, but the work that you do with them. And that requires something uncomfortable, and that's you being coachable again. I ended up having a good leader as I transitioned roles into another company, and I think that's kind of where my leadership skyrocketed, because not only was I vulnerable and open to being coached, but I wanted that same level of success that I had as an athlete, and I wanted to use that to build a high-performing team, because the work that I wanted to do depended on it. So I think the things to take away from this is that if you're looking to build that high-performing team, you don't just bring the intensity. You also have to bring a little bit of humility, because you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, what am I missing? And where am I making this harder than it actually needs to be? Because at the end of the day, your team isn't improving, isn't their problem alone. Because they're thinking about their experience working with you and for you. And that is more of a culture problem, and the system and process that you set up. And remember, you're a part of that system and those processes. So when you really start to take a look at what you're doing, really listen to your team. And that's exactly what I did when I started making my adjustments. I've started with listening. What were they saying to me without saying that thing? How were they taking my feedback, and how could I refine the feedback that I gave them? And being more proactive and deliberate with my messages and my goals and the projects that we have instead of being reactive. And that's the point. When I was able to really get in with my team and make the adjustments, listen better, give better feedback, and stop being so goddamn reactive, right? That's when we had an inflection point and we took it up to the next level, right? Because my team didn't work hard. They started to work smarter. They made fewer mistakes. They improved their work and their impact in the clubs faster, and they trusted the process. They knew that I had their back no matter what. And so when we're talking about your role in the corporate world or in any sort of operational organization, the real question becomes, how do you maintain that athlete level work capacity in a world that doesn't necessarily demand it? And how do you use that to build teams that actually make your life a little bit easier? Because as I mentioned in the article, we have the edge, and we have to be able and be ready to understand that there's no scoreboard for us to watch. People will pass us in our careers for other reasons other than our ability to outwork someone. And this is where the strategy piece comes into play. And this is where, if you want to keep your edge, you need to do a few things that will actually make a difference in what you're trying to do. And the first one is recreate your pressure intentionally. So when you've got deadlines, when you've got stakeholders that you're accountable to, you actually are able to work under that sense of pressure. But if you're just open-ended with everything, you don't get that sense of, I got to get this done because other people are relying on it. And if you don't have that, you have to actually go and build it. You have to hold yourself accountable. And that's where that pressure can mount. The other thing you need to do is install your feedback loops. When I got used to the fact that I needed to do a weekly one-on-one with every member of my team, our improvement got better. And it wasn't because we waited for annual reviews. It wasn't, those tend to be a little bit more formal and less impactful. But we got to a point where every week there were 3 things that I wanted to check in on. The first one was, how is my person doing? I want to know about the person. What's going on? Because that's going to give me an idea of what they're able to take on this week or in the next few weeks based on their bandwidth. The second piece was, what projects were they currently working on? Okay, so how the person's doing is going to impact on how their project work output is going to be. And if I can understand where they are in their roadmap, I kind of know when things are going to be due. Maybe we move up deadlines, maybe we move back deadlines, and it allows me to give them coaching and tactics and strategy within that. And the third piece that we covered was pipeline. And by pipeline, I mean, what's on the horizon? What are things that we need to look out for? Because that then allows me to be a little bit more deliberate in my coaching, because I can start coaching for things that I know are coming. So within this feedback loop, it's what's going on with the person, what's going on with their projects, and what do I not see that they see that we need to plan for. And that was able to get us into a good groove for being able to get the work done at a high level without completely burning ourselves out. And that leads me to the last point, which is treating your work like training. You got to remember, not every day is game day. Now, there are going to be times when you got to step in front of a board or a set of executives and give a big presentation, but you can't actually perform well in that presentation, for example, if you haven't done the work leading up to that point. And it's not you taking credit for someone else's work and then telling a story about it. It's you actually being in the work and being able to provide details that make sense, right? But you can't show up on game day without having practiced leading up to it. So if you're treating the work like training, then you're going to be in a really good spot. You're not just skirting over things and skimming, reading the Cliff's Notes, if you will. And if I have any other piece of advice that I could give to my former athlete crew, it's stay coachable, stay humble, take the feedback and turn it into what drives you. Because if you think you've arrived, you're stopping short of what could have been. And that's where you're gonna get passed by the everyday people, right? So if you can stay coachable, then you're gonna be able to surpass folks who have not played a sport and have not sharpened their edge in a high pressure environment. And so, at the end of the day, the biggest misconception that a lot of us have is that being an athlete was the peak of our career. Maybe it was for the first half of our life, but that's not the end of our story. That's the foundation from which we can do a lot of other cool stuff, because you can go back and tell stories and have those memories of what you did on the court or on the field, but it's what you built during that time that propels you into the next phase of life, into your second season. The things like the work capacity, the resilience, the adaptability, those base leadership skills, like those things don't actually expire. But like anything, you're either improving them or they're degrading. And if you don't do anything to try to improve them, they're going to fall off. And when you're able to carry that forward, you compare the intensity with the awareness, with the coaching, with the leadership, right? You don't just succeed in the professional world. You actually separate yourself from the pack. And if you're able to do that, you're going to be just fine in this life. Now, if this talk today hit close to home for you, be sure to share it with someone who's in that transition right now. I typically don't share things that are for the younger group of our former athlete population, because they've got their own things to figure out. They're trying to figure out their life in general. But if you know anyone, share it. And if you haven't read the full article, it's up on Substack. And we'll be back next week with another deep dive.